Okay, what, we are live? Okay, so hey guys, this is Irfan, and today we'll be talking about the fundamentals of Android native UI development. So by the end of this session, you people will know how to convert a UI such as this right in front of me that we've built in the session yesterday, and convert it into a front end that can be used in any Android application. So let's get started with discussing a couple of basic components that we've built, or rather you've built over yesterday. So as you can see here, this is one such screen, and this screen is primarily for a music app. So that you can see that there are, let's select this element, for example. So you can see there's a custom font, there's a custom size, color, etc. Simple stuff to change. After that comes these different tab icons. So if you've done any Android development, you know that Android has a pretty standard tab, and customizing it requires you to know how to convert the UI the design that you want to show into a particular component. Then coming down here, you can see that you have a widget kind of view over here that displays the currently or suggested music, custom buttons, track that is expected to scroll as you go down. And then you have this tiny player up at the bottom over here, which allows you to pause, forward. And at the bottom, you can see that it has a timeline track as well. So now, if you've gone through, let's say you want to build a basic, if you started building a basic Android application, right? So how will that look like? It'll typically look like, it'll have these set button formats, and it'll have these set design formats, which people are expected to extend. So as a beginner, none of these components usually matter, because primarily you're focused on how do you get your app to be functional. For example, if you are building a music app such as this one, you'd want it to have this search feature, you'd want it to play music, you want to add tracks, albums, artists, whatever may be the case. So that's the functionality part of it. But if you want to promote it, if you want other people to use it, you need to make the UI in such a way that it's friendly to the user, it's understandable. So that's where UX comes into play as well. So that's the user experience. Now, let's take an example of this itself. So in the UX of this, right, this feels natural. It feels smooth. You know exactly what's happening. You know how, let's say I want to play my favorite track. So right here, I can see on the main screen that I have this selection of tabs. So this entire component, this is an example of good UX and good UI design. So that's all about UI design. Now coming over to Android. Let me open up my Android Studio here. So in Android, you have this layout file. This layout file specifies how exactly you go about designing your UI. So by default, Android has many standard components. For example, a button would look this way. So let me zoom in here. And you can see that this is how a button would look like. So maybe I'll add in a text somewhere. Where my button go? So my button would look something like this. So now you can see that this button is where I should do that. Yeah, this button is nowhere compared to how we want it to look. So this is a button itself, but our button doesn't look like this. So how do you go from this? How do you go from this button to this button? Now, if you want to customize any component, let it be a custom button, or if you want to customize how an image view displays an image, you need to specify how the background, or rather how it is designed in either SVG, which is a scalable vector graphic, or a PNG format. So let's say I want to get in my, but let's say I want to get this button in. So the first step that I do is I select this, and over here you can see that at least on Figma, you have the option of directly exporting this SVG, this image. So you're going to select plus, export, SVG, export vector stroke. Once you do that, you'll have a zip file that you can download. And what you can then do is, you know what, I think I'll just do it once more here. So got it downloaded, open up my files, extract here. So this is the vector that I have. So now this vector is the one I want to import into my Android application. I want to use it as a button. So let's go back to Android Studio. under this res folder, the res folder is where you store all your resources, hence res. So I go here, right click, new, vector asset. Now, why do we take a vector asset and why do we not take an image asset? So an image asset is not scalable. Let's say you're building something for, okay, let's resize this over here. Let's make it a 6-inch screen. So when I make this a 6-inch screen, right? If I have an image, so let's say this background thing that I built here, right? If this was an image, this would have grainy pixelated ends. For example, look at this. You can see that this image that's being shown here is very pixelated. But if I go back to a 5-inch screen, this at a native, if you zoom in, it will look pixelated as always. But at the normal native resolution, it will look proper. So that's what SVGs avoid. They scale dynamically. So that's why, see, in spite of me having a smaller screen, the edges on this look sharp and crisp as it's meant to be. That is why we use vector graphics wherever we can. So let's go back into vector asset and then go back to downloads. And then over here, under this, you'll find the vector stroke shown here. And then you can click on OK, and then it'll import it into your Android Studio file. Now, I've previously done that. So when I go into my drawable folder, I may find that play button. See, this is the one. And this is how the vector is specified. So there's a this again goes back into vector graphics and how it's run. So that's something that's out of the scope for today's session. So we're just going to download it, convert it using the inbuilt converter, and this is what we'll have. Now, if you want to use this in our app, right? So what we do is then go back to our layout. Now the button is, okay, I removed the button. Let me go into this one because this is a better playground. So let's get that button in place. So since we have a custom background image, right, we don't want it to be like a typical button size. We don't want it to be square. So we go with the image button. So wrap content, and then we define the source, or rather, the source. And then we go here and say play. Now, when I zoom in, you can see that I have this drawable in place. But you can see that this has a gray background at the back. Now, in order to make sure that it's white, the only thing that we can see is this white triangle. We can just change the background to maybe black. And then go back here, background. And now you can see that this is exactly the button we want. This outline that's shown, that's just for your reference. But if you run it in an app, the only thing you'll see is this triangle. So that's how you import custom assets. So the custom assets that we'll be importing today are all of these components. So this album, we're going to export these buttons. And those are the only components that we'll be exporting, along with this background image that we have here of this stroke. So let's get started with building our main page. So now you can see that this has a set of tabs, and this whole top view is the background of it. So whenever I select a tab, I'm expecting that this particular component will change. The top component, this will remain a constant. Maybe the header will change, but apart from that, everything else remains the constant. So for that, what we need to do is we need to specify a main layout file which holds this component, and a placeholder layout file which holds this entire segment. This allows us to have multiple views inside one activity and allows us to keep this as it is without having to worry about creating it in different files. So how we get started is basically we just export this file, head over to Android Studio, and then we can go over to our activity main file. Over here, you can see that I've already done this. So what I've done is I've created an image view over here, pasted it in there. There's another text with a specified name, and it's got fonts as well. So you can see that over here, we have specified the font size as well. Yeah, so I've defined a custom style here. So you might have noticed that I'm not going into the details of how to build an application or how Android is functioning. That's the objective of this seminar, is to allow you to use Android Studio and get your UI in place. So covering the basics would be is very lengthy and very in depth. So now, in order to specify, now to see where the font was specified, right? I head over into values, styles, and over here that you can see that I've specified a style that says header style. So I'm using this font. So this font, by the way, is the one that's being used here. So when I click it, it says Poppins. So in order to use this, you have to just search for the Poppins font, download the entire font, and then just copy the .ttf. It's the format of a font file is a .ttf file. So you just copy it, paste it here. Make sure you follow the naming conventions because most fonts, they usually come with a capital starting letter and it has hyphens in place. It has hyphens in space of these underscores. So Android Studio does not support them. So if you ever notice that your font isn't working properly, just make sure that you rename it properly and it will work like a charm. So you can see that I've specified the font family, the text size, and the text color over here. So heading back here, that's what I'm using as my style. So this is what gives this text view this look. Now, after that, I'm positioning these elements. So I'm using a constraint layout here. Why am I using a constraint? There are multiple types of layouts. There's a linear layout, there's a relative layout, but constraint layouts are by far one of the best layouts that you can use. The reason being, these are very adaptable. So let's say I want to resize this to a smaller screen. So let's get to something around 3.7. So you can see that it automatically resizes. The edges are kept constant the way I want them to be. The title bar, the music icon that I have here, the placeholder for my view, every single component is resized dynamically. That is why we use a constraint layout. So this keeps a track of a constraint layout is based off the device that it is running on. So that makes it that allows it to dynamically adapt to every screen size. So that's why we use a constraint layout. So here you can see that I've aligned this with certain constraints. So you can see on the left, it's got a 30 dp padding as specified over here in the UI. From the top, it's around 55. For Android purposes, this is an iPhone 11 Pro, so it's a pretty large screen. But for Android devices, most Android devices aren't that large. So I've changed the padding to around 20 to make it seem a little better. So this is my basic view over here. I've got my image view, same thing. I've got my drawable inside here. I've got the source specified and a drawable specified. And that's how this is displayed. Apart from that, a text view would display this text. An image view would display that profile image. And then we have this tabs layout. Now, tabs layout is an Android file which allows you to specify and set tabs. So this is what we'll be using over here to draw our tabs. Now, the styling, we'll do it in a little while. But first, let's get this first screen done. After which comes this entire white space. You can see that it's called a view pager. Now, this is another Android class which allows you to put in multiple activities into one fragment. So in Android, any screen is an activity. So one screen can't be more than one activity. But if you do want to have multiple activities in a screen, you can use a view pager, which allows you to have nested activities inside your screen. So this is our base background layout design. So now let's get started into designing our first screen. Now let's say I want to run this app. So there are some basic requirements needed. So you need to set up the view pager. You need to set an adapter up for it that lets you handle the changes. For example, now that again is going into Android native development. This is the development side of things. So this is all the data that you'll be filling in with placeholder values or any. This is what makes the app functional. This is not what makes the app aesthetic, or this is not what makes the app UI oriented. So let's go back here. So this is just basic classes that I'm just showing you. Won't be going into in depth with this. So this is a basic setup of these classes, all the tabs that we have. So we have a tab that says overview. We have a tab that says track. So you can see just basic placeholder code with the layout inflators, which render my layout. So if I run this on my device, you can see that this is the following screen. I have my, one second, I need to change this. Okay, now if I run this again, this is the end product that we need to get. So let's start with how a basic tab. So this is how a basic tab would look like in Android if you don't customize it anyway. So we have a basic screen here, and then we have our tabs, which is our basic functionality. Now that is your top page done. Now we need to design this entire section of our app, which is this component. So let's get started with that. So we can see that there's text, there's a card-like structure here with buttons, suggest a song. We can see top tracks, and then this is a list of items which will be scrolled. So let's go back to our Android Studio and let's start building. So you can see that I have a dedicated, you can head over to layout, new layout resource file, and that way you can create your own, a new layout file. So I've already done that, and this is the one over here. So let's get started with this. So the first thing that I will need on my layout is this text. So for that, I'm going to have to define a text view. I want it to wrap content. The height should be another wrap content. Text is for you. And then we have its style, which is going to be section style. As you see, I've previously defined it over here, heading back to my styles file. So having this styles file allows you to have themes for your application set up in a single place. For example, let's say I wanted to do this. You can do this in the XML file itself. So for example, let's say I didn't have a style, right? I can just go here, type font family, and then type in this. And then what's my text size, my text color, everything can be specified in that text view widget itself. But having this style set out, right, this makes things a lot easy. You don't need to worry about adding those repetitive lines of code every single time you want to define a text view. So that's my style done. And I need to specify the margins and the length. So let's say I want to position it to, so from here, it's position 30 from here. And from the top, it's saying 200. But since we already have this top segment defined, right, we just need to position it with respect to this. So this is just saying what? Around 50. But for Android purposes, since this screen is large, so that's why I'm just going back and making it a little smaller. So let's just keep it to 30 dp. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to uncomment this line. And this will show you that exact same thing. So all these, right, these things are basic features that you define by dragging and dropping. So if I cut these out, right, you can see that this has no anchors. So all of these, those lines, right, they specify anchors. So I can just anchor them to sort all corners of my app. So this lets me align it anywhere inside the app's body, irrespective of the screen size. So since I specified some constraints, right? So I had specified them. I think they're gone now. Yeah, so these were the constraints that I had. So you can see that they are put in over here. So once you do that, you can just drag this into your position, and then that is your text view setup. After this comes this rather different looking view. It's not a button. It's something larger, though. It's not exactly a list style either. So in Android, this component is called a card view. So that's what we'll be using to customize our card. So let's get started with that as well. Now, you can see that there's an image over here, text, another text, and a couple of buttons. So we have to align all of this inside our card view. So thinking from a design perspective, you can see that on the surface level, all of these components are arranged horizontally, right? So you have an image view, and then to the right, you have this text section, and then on the right, you have this button, and then you have on the right another button. And then inside this, you can see that inside this text, right, you can see that there's a vertical component as well. There's a primary, the song text up here, and then there's the artist name and the song length at the bottom. So this is going to be a nested layout. So how do we go about designing that? So the first thing we do is we go ahead and create our card view. So type down card view. If you're using card view for the first time, it will probably show up in red, and it will ask you to import a particular component. So you just hit Alt Enter, and it will import everything for you. So now we need to specify a width and a height. So going back here, you can see that this is 350 by 993. So let's just round it off and make it 350 and my bad. Yeah, 350 dp. And we have a 90 dp height. Now you can see that whenever I type this out, right, you can see that the multiple options that are given. dp, inches, millimeter, points, pixels, sp. Now, DP and SP, these are the components that we primarily use in Android. Using these other components, inches, millimeter, points, and pixels, aren't recommended because pixel densities and point densities vary from screen to screen. So you can't be constantly sure of a specific screen size. The best way to do it is DP. DP stands for density independent pixels, rather DIP. So this is a way of having to scale your app up and down across different devices. So even if you have a tiny 4-inch screen compared to a larger 6-inch screen, you can still have the same quality of text, irrespective of what resolution the device is on. So for text specifically, so let's say you're using a text view, right? So the advice would be to go and use SP because screen pixels allow for better, they're primarily targeted towards text objects. So SP always for screen pixels. And if you're using anything else, for example, a card view or a custom layout, you always preferably stick with DP. So let's go back to sticking with our DP here. After this, we can also see that the corners of these are rounded. By default, a card view, if you can see here, it is not rounded. It's got a sharp edge. It's got very basic rounding. It's like probably a centimeter or something. But we want it to be rounded further. So we type card corner radius, pops up here. According to this says that the rounding is 10 pixels, border radius 10 pixels. So we go here, 10 dp. And now you can see that our border has a more curved edge. So that's our base card view done. So this is the fundamental structure in which we'll be building our components. So now let me remove this, uncomment this previously built section. And there we have. So what I've done is this has been previously positioned. So I positioned it with respect to the corners, the top, all of that stuff. And I've got it right where I want it to be according to the UI design that I have. Now comes the next part, which is designing this entire section here. So now you can see that this has a blue gradient background, right? Now, if I fill, let's say I want, let's say what the color is a linear gradient. So let's say this, I copy this color and then I go back here, background tint. So you can see that I have the color in place here now, but it's not a gradient. It's not how I want this to look like. So how do I go about designing? As you can see, this component of mine, it only takes in a hash code or it takes in a drawable resource file, but there's no way for me to specify a gradient color here. So how do I do that? In order to customize shapes or gradients or any of that sort, right? What we need to do is we need to create a custom drawable that tells the computer tells the device how to draw the particular background. So in order to do that, what we first do is go over to our drawable section over here under res, drawable resource file. We can name it, let's say we want it to be the gradient for the card, right? So let's say we name it card gradient or something. So card gradient. Now, since I've already got it defined here, I'm going to name it card gradient 2. So now we want a gradient. So as you can see here, we want it to have so in order to define a gradient, we need to define an enclosing shape. This shape defines where the gradient starts and where the gradient ends. So as you can see over here, we have a shape which is in the form of a rectangle. We've defined a start color and end color. So let's go back to our code here, this UI here. You can see that the linear gradient starts at this color, 66B0, and ends at 1A6. And that's what we've got here. So this defines our gradient. Now, we want our gradient to be horizontal, right? You can't see, there's no tilt or no angle of sorts. If you want to have your, let's say you want your gradient to be top to bottom. So you can just make this 90, and you can see that the gradient flips around here. If I go back to 0, it's back to being horizontal. So that's how you define a gradient. So now I want to use this in my background. So how do I do that? Go back to my fragment overview. Here I go background, card gradient. Background tint. Okay, no, I can't do it on a card view. You need to do it on a card view. Setting a background allows you to only set a color. You can't set your own custom drawable. Let's say you want to host an image, or you want to put a button, you want to put some image or some background, right? A card view can't do that. In order to let your card view have a custom gradient, right, we have to use another hierarchy inside, which is our linear layout. So as I said before, we have a component here, horizontal component, which holds the image view, the text view here, the buttons, etc. So I go back in here, I define my linear layout again. So you can see that I've already got it filled in. So let me just remove this part of it. So this linear layout, I'm matching it to the parent so that it wraps the entire, it fills the available space in the card view since I've already defined the size here. So the width is fixed, the height is fixed. I've got it aligned to the center. I want every object to be in the center rather than in the corner. And I've got it oriented horizontally. So in a linear layout, all my objects are going to be stacked horizontally. So if I want to set the background to it, I just type Android background card gradient, and there you have it. I have my custom card view with its UI as intended. So now let's go back to the components that we have to build. So you can see there's an image view, text, another text, button, button. So that's what this entire section of code does. So now you've seen that all of this, you need to position it manually. So we've got your image view here. Again, the drawable, what I've done is just exported it. Now, since this is not something that will scale with size, right? If you use it, this is just for this is just as a prototype, a UI prototype. So for now, we're teaching you how to build this UI into your Android app. So this is going to be an image for now, but hypothetically in a music app, right, you primarily want this to be stored on device as either as an SVG if possible, or a PNG as it is, it's fine. So since we're just going to use this screen, right, we're not having dynamic content, we don't have any of the backend to worry about, we're just going to select this image and export it as a PNG. Once you export it, just drag and drop it into your REST folder in Android, and you can just directly use it in this way. So that's our image view done. Now we have our text. Now, if let's say if I just add in my text, right? Let's say I remove this, and if I remove this, you can see that it's arranged horizontally. That's because I've specified my orientation as horizontal in here. So that's why I said that we need another component inside which nests this. So if I put back my linear layout, you can see it's arranged neatly vertically. So you can see that. Yeah, you can see that it's neatly arranged over here in a vertical stack. It's got a margin which I specified, 16 dp, as from this component, you can see 16 dp. And inside here, we've got a text view. And this is an example of when I'm not using a style. So I'm specifying the font family here. I'm specifying the text color. I'm specifying the text size, all of that stuff. And then below it, I've got another text which specifies this particular component. Now, you can see that this text is faded. It's the same color, but it's a little opaque. So in order to specify objects opacity, right? Android has this function that says alpha. So if I change this alpha value to 0.2, you can see it becomes a little more opaque. And then I can just put 0.6, and it's back to where exactly it is. So 0.6 is the value that was specified over here. So you can see opacity is 0.6. So that's our component, our text component done. After which comes our buttons. Again, as demonstrated in the example previously, it's a basic image button, and then you specify the drawable with that component. And that's about it. You have your card view in place. Now comes the next part, which is your top tracks and this entire section. So top tracks is just going to be another basics text view. So I'll just copy this. I'll just uncomment this rather. And we have our top tracks appear right here. But in order to get this view, right, we want to make it functional. Our objective is not to tie it to a backend, but it should still be interactable. So in order to do that, the one way would, if you are just trying to convert this to from a UI to an Android app, right? If you're not worrying about functionality or any of that sort, you'd primarily just use a couple of these. So I just copy multiple of these, and I'd copy multiple of these card views, paste them all the way at the bottom to make them stack up, and just change the background color to maybe white or something. And then it'll look as intended. It'll look perfectly normal like this. But the thing is, it's not scrollable. It's not interactable in any way. So in order to build an interactable component, we need something that acts as a list. So that's where a list view comes in. So before we start, Listview is a pretty old component. It's not something new. It's not optimized rather for newer applications. It's not optimized for user performance. So in this app, since list views are very easy to work with. So as a beginner, as when you're starting up, right, a list view is a good example to start off with. But if you're trying to build an app that you want people to use, primarily you wouldn't focus on a list view. You'd focus on a component that's called recycler view. So more on that, you can read on later through Android documentation guidelines. And the difference is basically that a list view will keep a track. So let's say you have 100 elements, right? So all the 100 elements will be rendered and kept in memory. That is, even though there's just like 10 elements shown on the screen, that's a massive waste of space and CPU time. So your application becomes very memory hungry, which leads to more power draw, and it's not ideal for a user. A recycler view will, as its name said, it recycles them. So let's say you have like 8 components on the screen, right? Every time one pops up, it'll recycle it, put it at the bottom back again. So that's the fundamental difference between them. One is very optimized, the other one isn't. But a list view is very easy to work with as a beginner. So let's define our list view here. So let me just comment this. And now we have our list view in place. Okay. So now, let me just remove this component since it will confuse. Yeah, so this is our list view, right? All the components. You can see it's already populated, but that's because I'm asking it to render something before. So once I remove this, you can see it'll be just blank. There's nothing inside it. So if I want to define an element, right, you need to specify how each element looks like. So each of our elements is going to look exactly the same as this one. And it's just going to have a white background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layout file which says list style song. So that specifies how exactly all the list styles inside it looks like. So I've got it created already over here. So you can see it's the same code. It's the exact same code that we've got over here. So this entire component, right, this card view up here, this entire code has just been copied into a different file and pasted here. Only difference is the background, as you can see, is white because there's no background specified for it. The only thing is it's been blocked, and that's about it. Once we have this list style in place, right, we can go back to our overview fragment. Inside here, tools, a list item, and our name was list style song. And now this will show a list of all the elements that you have. Now note, this component, a tools component, right? This means that this is shown in your layout screen. It is not shown in the screen that you have on your app. So if I just, let's say, add tools list item and I run it, right, I'll see a blank screen. There's nothing that's going to be visible for me over here. So this is just for your reference. This is for you to understand there's something in here. So that's your list tile done. After that comes this floating component. So again, this is similar to this in the exact same way. We've got our card view, we've got our image, we've got our name, text, we've got buttons to handle certain operations, whatever they may be. And that's our UI done. So this is our main screen done, and this is our background, the base background done over here. So now we want to link them both. So let's head back to our code over here. This is not in the main. So we have a fragment. So as you can see, this is some code that I've commented out. So in order to get my list view and all my adapters in place, right, in order to have it functional, basically, I have this set of codes, this code over here. So what am I doing in here? So I'll give a brief dive into how the programming part of it works. So this is your main activity file. This is the main page. So let me open this app again. So this entire screen, right? All the tabs that I'm pressing, all this activity that's happening, every single thing is this main activity right here. I'm not using multiple activities. But how am I able to screen through all these different activities at the bottom? So you can see that I can scroll through different ones over here. So how do I do that? In order to do that, I'm using my view pager, as you can see that I've specified over here. A view pager is another Android class which lets you do that. So coming back to your main activity, you can see that I have a view pager. I've find view by ID allows you to bind your XML components to your Java code. And this is your adapter, which allows you to map your fragments. So since we have multiple activities being displayed, right, we need to have an adapter that maps fragments to particular sections. So you can see that for each activity, I have a fragment. So albums fragment, artist fragment, list view fragment, main music, overview fragment, tracks fragment. So these items specify how exactly, or rather, what are the different functionalities of each of these components. So let's head over to our overview fragment for now. Over here, you can see that I've defined some song names and I've defined some song descriptions. So these are hard-coded values. Ideally, in a functional app, you won't have this. So since this is a UI demo, we're just having these hard-coded values here. And once we have these hard-coded values in here, we have our drawables in place as well. So once we have our drawables in place, right, our next step would rather be to adapt all our views and all our sections into components. So what we're doing is we are finding a view, we are inflating it rather with this particular. Oh, okay, one second. Apparently there's been some font size issue. All right. So I hope this font size is a little more clear. So let me zoom out here. Yeah. So you can see that over here I've got, this is a boilerplate code. So override func on create view. All of this is basic Android framework code. Over here, I'm finding that layout. So we created a layout that says fragment overview, right? So going back to, this is our fragment overview. So we're just telling our code that, hey, this is our fragment and this is how we want it to look like. And then we have our custom adapter over here, which binds our names to our list items. We have our list view. We have our card text, current card image, current card description. Now, these three components, right? I'll tell you why these aren't exactly needed, but as I wanted to make it as functional as possible, right now. So since I have these three components, so in our fragment class, in our overview class, right, you can see that there's this bottom component. Now this is a dialog that shows which track is actively playing. So that means that whenever I click on a particular tile, right, so let's say I click on him over here, it means that should show up in here. That is the reason I've got this entire segment here. So this current card text, current card image, current card description. These bind to these objects. So you can see that this text view inside has an ID of name text. This text has an ID of description text. And when I go back here into my overview fragment, you can see that I'm calling that specific thing, name text, description text, etc. That's how you bind your XML files to your XML components to your Android file. Then coming down, we are binding our list view. Every list view has an adapter. List view also has custom adapters, which inbuilt defined adapters, which you don't need to worry about. But since we have a custom list style, right? As you can see, we created our own list style over here, which has an image, text, description, all that kind of stuff. So we need to make a custom one for this. So inside here, we've got adapter set. And then since whenever I click on this component, right, I want it to show up here. So I need to set an adapter that listens to every single click. So I've got on item click listener here, which gets the position. And then every time I select an element, right, it goes to the current card text and sets its text to the song name specified. So whichever position I click, for example, this will be 0, 1, 2, right? If I click 1, it'll pop up and show him. Him will show up here. So that's what this component does. So that's your overview fragment. Now, in the other fragments, since we haven't got anything else defined, right, we're just going to keep them blank for now. So we're just going to have our, the fragment tracks layout. So if I go and inspect this, you can see it's nothing. It's a blank screen and a basic text view that says tracks. That is what's happening here. So when I click tracks, you can see tracks here. So that's just a placeholder. So if you had a UI designed for that as well, you can start coding it in here. When I go back to my tracks fragment, I'm just inflating this layout to show in my albums fragment similarly. In my artist fragment, similarly, the same thing. That's the basic stuff. Now, going back to our overview fragment, you can see that I have a custom adapter here, right? A Listview adapter. Let's go a little bit in depth into that as well. So this Listview adapter, you can see it's again got another description name array. So this is a list of all the descriptions, a list of all the songs, that kind of stuff. So ideally in a production application, you will not have anything hard-coded. You will have everything passed in. So for example, an example of that would be how I'm passing in my song names over here. So song name is an already existing array. I'm just passing it in here and I'm retrieving it inside my adapter. If you're doing it for a recycler view, the adapter concept is similar, but the syntax may differ. So now over here, we have a basic get view function. So you can see that it has a position, a convert view, and a parent. So for now, we aren't focusing on these two as they are irrelevant to our current context. What we'll be focusing on is the position. The position specifies which element is this. Rather, it's a unique ID for each element. Whenever you click an element, right, you want the system to know that, hey, I've clicked this element, I've clicked this song, or I've clicked this song. In order to specify a unique ID for it, the unique ID itself is the position. The position is an integer, 0 onwards. So it's similar to how you'd index an array, starting from 0. So here you can say that I am getting my view. Again, I'm inflating my layout, which is my list style song. List style song is that list style that we created previously. Going back into our list style over here, you can see this is the list style that we have here, and this is the same list style that we are trying to display in our list view. So let's go back to our adapter. And then inside here, we have a song name, we have a song description, and we have an image view. Now, every time we create a new element, right, we need to specify its name, we need to specify its description, we need to specify its image. So for that case, for that reason, we have this song name over here, and then we're giving it names of position. So names is again that array that I'm taking in. Then song description.text. Again, the song description array, I'm getting the exact position, feeding it in. And then in my image view, I'm getting my drawable. As you can see, I have an image array allocated here. So all my drawable files as a resource, I'm fetching that resource at a particular position, and then I'm just returning that. So whatever I return is shown on the screen. So now, when I run this app, this is how it looks like. Tracks, albums, artists. Going back to my overview, I've got this nice scrollable interface in place, and I have this card view over here. So you can see that whenever I click, let's say I want to click on Kalki, that's what shows up here. Him, that's what shows up here. Knock, that's what shows up here. So just the core basic functionality of how it'll look like. Now, another major point I want to point out is this UI, right? It's been designed for a large screen. And this over here is designed for a small screen. You can see that this is a smaller screen. This is what you need to keep in mind when you design your applications. Because a screen that looks great, for example, you can see on this screen, I've got plenty of space. I can clearly see my view. I can clearly see my songs. I can have this neat little tab at the bottom. But when I go into my screen here, this seems it seems congested. So that's what you got to keep in mind. So you need to keep that's why we use constraint layout. But since we have hard-coded padding, right? So we have specified size constraints that you want to stick to for UI purposes. We need to, well, I've stuck with that for now. So ideally, if we had to make it for a smaller screen size, you'd have to move this up a little. You'd remove unnecessary spacing right here. You try to make this smaller or make it a pop-up. So whenever, let's say, you scroll down, you slide up from the bottom, this pops up, something of that sort. So this is your basic functionality. Now you can see that the tab, again, isn't customized. I want it to be a dot. So how do I go about doing that? So let's go back to our tab section here. So in our tab section, you can see that we have a tab color that we've given, a tab height, etc. But we want to make it a dot. Again, remember the same way how we specified our custom components, right? How we specified our shape, the background drawable for the gradient. Similarly, we again have to go and create another drawable that is our tab indicator. So what we want it to be is a tiny dot. We don't want it to be stretched. So due to how tabs work in Android, right? So I've defined a rectangle with a radius of 10 dp. You could try this with a ring. If you make it a circle or a ring, right? It'll be pretty straightforward. But the problem is it'll stretch to fit this. So this, I'll show you how that looks like in a minute. Let me remove this. Make this an oval. Making an oval over here. So now I'm assuming that it'll probably be fine. Let's say I just set its size to height is 3 dp, height is 3 dp, and now it should be a proper circle, right? And now if I want to set this as a background, again, the basic stuff, go back here. Where's my, yeah. Go back here and then app. So since it's my tab, right? So it should be a tab indicator, and we want it to be our custom tab indicator. Now if you run it, you can see that it's a stretched out circle now. So we don't want that. That is why we manually shrink the size. So in order to prevent stretching, we are specifying its size. So what we're going to do is cut this, and then we will uncomment this and paste this in here. And now you can see that I've defined inside my layer list, right? I've defined an end and a start. So it's saying that it should be 42 dp from the right and 42 dp from the left. Now when I run this, you can see that I have a perfectly normal dot. So now you can see, so that's our final conversion. So we've got our entire front end designed up and ready. So that is our UI part. Rather, the UI, how to convert your UI demos, UI examples into your Android code. So before we wrap up, I know I've gone pretty much over time. So what I'll do is one more demonstration I want to give, which is for animations. So let me go back here. So Android also allows you to build custom animations. So these animations are very useful for users. So this is one such example. So you can see that over here I have this custom layout, which looks pretty smooth. It allows me to scroll through books as and when I wanted to. And then a tiny segment at the bottom, it's my library. So if I want to access a book, I just scroll this up. And then this is my entire list of books that I'm reading. And then if I want to put it back down, I can just hold the top, drag it down, and it sits at the bottom. These kind of animations are complicated. So they require you to, again, specify how exactly you want to, how exactly a component displays, what's the background, etc. So in a high level view, right? I'll explain in just how this animation works. So this is me. So for this, every time I pull up the screen, it's loading another view into place. So similarly to how we have this card view, right? We had the card view up here. Similarly, another view that's just popping up over here whenever I drag it. Now, whenever it's dragged to the bottom, right, we have the specified tab space, which shows all these images. When I drag them, these images move to a certain location based on the height of the tab. And then when I move it to its max size, the entire component inside is replaced with a list view, which lets me scroll. So that's how you go about designing and thinking about animations. These animations, now coming back to animations, building animations in Android Studio is a little cumbersome. It's not so easy to work with, and it takes some time and effort to build them. The best way to build animations, or rather if you're trying to build multi-platform applications or have good UI, right? The best way would be to build it in Flutter. Flutter is very dynamic and it's very easy to use for beginners. So over here, you can see that this entire component, again, this is the syntax part of it, so I can't go into depth with explaining it. So this entire page, right, these 300 lines or so, these define how exactly the animation happens and what exactly moves when. So when I drag my image up, how do these image moves? How does their size scale up? When does it turn into a list view? All that stuff. So these are all mathematical operations that you can see, scale operations happening, transformations happening, all that kind of stuff. So that was a very brief introduction. I don't think I have time to go into the detail for animation. So the objective was to allow you guys to go from a UI demo to this working prototype of a UI. So hope you guys found this useful, and have a good day.